Thanks for choosing our event to participate. We have so many events happening at the same time. So it's a pleasure to have you here, okay? So our event is called Gender Disaggregated Data in the Forest Sector. We will be discussing from now until 7 p.m. in Seoul time. And now I'm gonna introduce to you to our moderator. It is a very special person that is here with us. Just a moment, please. So we are gonna have a lot of very interesting speeches this afternoon, and our moderator will be Ivone Namikawa. Ivone is a Brazilian forest engineer with 37 years of experience in forest management, research, and sustainability at Klabin, a Brazilian forest-based products company. Gender and inclusion is one of many different issues related to sustainability that are in her focus. Ivone is an honorary member of the Brazilian Forest Women's Network. She is also a board member at the IFSA International and co-leader of the steering committee of the Forest Dialogue. So Ivone, welcome. Thank you for your participation in this event, and you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Natalia, for this introduction. It's a great pleasure to be here, and much more because I have so many good friends speaking today, and many of our friends also in the audience, online, and there I saw Milagre, my dear co-leader at the Forest Dialogue, in the room. So it's a great pleasure, and it's our aim to create an environment of knowledge where we can share and help to address gender equality in the forest sector. I think we are working all together in our organizations, but all together here to be in a more inclusive and diverse environment. First of all, I would like to introduce my colleague, Natalia Granato, that is there with you, and she started with no introduction, so I'm going to introduce her. She is a forest engineer and master in forest sciences with 11 years of experience. She serves as vice president of Forest Women's Network, a wonderful network that we are going to hear much more about today. And she is a manager of the Sustainability and Forest Affairs at IBA, an association that represents the planted forest industry in Brazil, including around 60 companies and state associations. She represents IBA at the Forest Dialogue, TFD, the Brazilian Coalition of Climate, Forests and Agriculture, the International Council of Forest and Paper Associations, and the Advisory Committee on Sustainable Forest-Based Industries at FAO. So she is very important, and you can take advantage of being with her today. Now, I think we can start our session having a great speech from Cecile. I'm not going to say her name, the total name, because I never could. I'm with Cecile now almost 8 years as a good friend, but I cannot say her last name, so she's going to do that. I would like to introduce Cecile, that is a gender specialist and women leadership trainer and advisor with more than 35 years of experience in development work, advocacy for rural women rights to land and forests. Cecile is the founder of the African Women's Network for Community Management of Forests, REFACOF, an advocacy platform focusing on African women's tenure rights in land and forest reforms. Cecile is the focal point at UNFF, the advisory board member of the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, African Forest Forum Governing Council member, and the Forest Dialogue Council member, among others. Cecile, please take the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Yvonne. Thank you all for joining. I will be sharing with you some challenges and opportunities to gender disaggregated data in the international context. I will start by introducing REFACOF very shortly, and then the context and background information on gender disaggregated data. How do gender disaggregated data matter in the forestry sector, but at the international context, key challenges and opportunities, and then some take-home messages. So REFACOF is the African Women's Network for Community Management of Forests, with the aim to promote women's rights in Africa and advocate to shape policies and practices for gender equity in relation to land and forest tenure. We were created in 2009 in Yaoundé, Cameroon, and we are now composed of 20 countries from West and Central Africa, including Madagascar. REFACOF is an advocacy platform that focuses on African women's tenure rights in land and forest. And we have four intervention areas: capacity building, tenure reforms, advocacy and experience sharing, and women's economic empowerment. And this is our map, and you can see from Senegal, Mali, Liberia, Cote d'Ivoire, Burkina Faso, Ghana, Togo, Benin, Nigeria, Cameroon, Equatorial Guinea, Chad, CAR, Central African Republic, Congo, Gabon, DRC, Rwanda, Burundi, and Madagascar. This is the REFACOF, and Gambia, sorry, I forgot the Gambia. It's part of the REFACOF family. So the context and short background, as I usually say, and I am always very happy to start with that, the forestry sector is well known as a male mute. What is this? Later? Unmute myself, is that I have to choose? Unmute myself.
We can hear you.
Okay. Okay. So I was.
No.
No. Then I have to. Okay, it's muted now. Okay. The forestry sector is well known as a male-dominated sector, from the design and of policies up to the management of forest programs and projects. This is a reality, and I'm always happy to remind us about that. But women and men have different roles in society, different access to and control over resources, different needs and priorities, and different skills and interests. The third element is on policies. Policies and programs affect women and men differently. And gender is different from sex. Gender is the social definition of what is meant to be a woman or a man. Gender refers to the economic, social, political, and cultural attributes and opportunities associated with being women or men. They vary among cultures and change over time. In the contrary, sex refers to biologically defined and genetically acquired differences between males and females according to their physiology and reproductive capacities and potentialities. Sex is universal and mostly unchanging without surgery. Unless we go for surgery, will not change the sex. Next. Oh. It's not moving.
Try the mouse.
No. Okay.
Yes.
Cecilia, I'm sorry. Are you presenting to the audience online as well?
Do you hear me? There is something wrong. Do you hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Yes.
Okay.
And online it works fine.
Okay. Thank you. So why do gender disaggregated data matter? For us, it's because the differences between men and women, as mentioned earlier, should be reflected in official statistics. It also matters because focusing on gender provides evidence of gender differences. It strengthens and improves the whole statistical system. Gender disaggregated data matters also because they can identify patterns of discrimination faced by specific groups. And more specifically, they help to know the full extent of discrimination or harm faced by women. Consistent internationally and comparable statistics on women's and girls' outcomes remain scarce also in the key areas, especially in the forestry sectors. They also matter because they can assist, they help, they are used for gender responsive budgeting and also for policy, program, and project implementation. But what are the key challenges and the opportunities we can have when we are talking about gender disaggregated data? Some key challenges, we have found three main. Getting people convinced of the importance of gender disaggregated data is a big issue. Some don't know why we have to go for it. They don't see the differences with what is going on compared to what we are suggesting them to do. The capacities for collection, analysis, and implementation also is challenging. It's a great challenge. And funding, of course. To do all this, we need to mobilize adequate funding. The opportunities, we can have a series of 5. First of all, we have the United Nations Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, the CEDAW. And we have the Platform for Action of the Beijing 4th World Conference on Women that was held in 1995. We have the SDGs and the Agenda 2030. We have the Paris Agreement, and we have the Global Forest Goals. These are the opportunities we can take to make sure that gender disaggregated data becomes a reality in our work. Some take-home messages. What we would like you to understand and to keep and to take home is that gender disaggregated data are the basis for developing policies to foster greater gender equality. It will help to achieve the gender equality. They are needed to monitor and evaluate the effectiveness and efficiency of policy development. They help to inform the data users, such as the researchers, the media, the NGOs, and the general public. And they help also to improve national statistical systems. These are the key 4 home messages we would like to share with you. And I would like with that to thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cecile, for this presentation. It's an honor to have Cecile here talking to us. I would like to remind you that the convening organizations of this side event are Rede Mulher Florestal, the Forest Women's Network, IBA, the Brazilian Tree Industry, IFSA, the International Forest Students Association, and REFACOF, the African Women's Network for Community Management of Forests. I would like now to introduce you our second speaker, who is Mariana Szuszowski. Mariana is the president of the Forest Women's Network and also one of its founders. She is a forest engineer, holds a PhD in forest sciences, and has been working with sustainability for the last 20 years. Mariana is the CEO of Verde Floresta, a Brazilian company that offers sustainability consulting and training. She is also a graduate professor at top-tier universities in Brazil. Mariana, please take the floor.
Thank you very much, Yvonne. Thank you all. It's a pleasure and really happiness moment for me, for us to be here with you. And thank you everyone for the audience. I'm going to share some slides with you so I can present the Forest Women's Network and some studies we've recently done. So I'm going to present some forest gender outlook data in Brazil. My name is Mariana Szuszowski, and as Yvonne just presented me, I am the president of the Forest Women's Network in Brazil, or in Portuguese, Rede Mulher Florestal. First of all, who we are, right? We are an organization, Brazilian organization. We were founded in 2018 as an independent and non-governmental and non-profit and as well non-partisan organization. And our objective is to allow men and women to connect as a platform in a way to expand, promote, and share their and our knowledge on gender in the forest-based sector. Our mission is to discuss gender while we can still promote respect for diversity, equity, equality, and of opportunity for women in the forest-based sector. And as a vision, we want to work in a forest-based sector where there is gender equality. We act towards 7 different pillars, strategic actions. We act towards women in decision-making, forest policy and gender, presence and role of women in the sector, equality and empowerment, information, education and training, as well as in management. And putting everything together, we started to do a very pioneer study here in Brazil regarding to the forest gender outlook in our sector. So in 2029, we started to collect data from organizations so that we could understand what is the scenario in terms of gender in the forest sector. This first study, this first edition was launched then in 2020. And because it was the first picture or assessment that we had, it became very important and huge, so that the organizations, companies, and other organizations could start understand the challenges and the gaps that were there in terms of gender. Then on 2021 and on this beginning of this year, 2022, we launched the second edition, and that's the one that I'm going to present some data over here. So some key findings, and I would like to just let you know that there are some information here, and as well, I'm going to put the QR code at the end of my presentation so you can access the complete forest gender outlook in Brazil. First of all, just to understand the companies and the organizations that were included on the forest gender outlook, the data were based on 41 organizations from the forest-based sector, consider either forest plantations, pines, oaks, teak, and other species, as well as the native management industries. And all of those represents, for example, paper and cellulose as a 37%, almost 26% of saw timber and other solid wood products, as well as other types of industries. So the first outlook came out with the information that there were we didn't achieve 13% of women on those organizations that were interviewed. And then on 2021, we found a little bit of a bigger number, representing almost 19% of women in those spaces. It seems that we have had an increase of 6%, but it's not necessarily that perception that we want to give you, because not exactly the same organizations were interviewed between the two outlooks. So yes, it seems that there is a slight increase, but we cannot definitely assume it as with certain. So when we, for example, when we separate the women and men by work area, we can see here in the blue line the participation of men, and then on the red or pink line, participation in women. And then as a total, we see some data that represents, for example, here, from the 41 organizations, some of them didn't separate the data on those work area. So we just utilize a part of them. But anyway, we can see how the proportion goes when we go, for example, from, let's see, harvesting and logging, that we have 2%, not more than 3% of of women here. And then when we go for, let's see, example for nurseries, we have 41% of women participation. And then in some areas, we have a bigger participation of women, more than in other areas like forest roads, forest services provider, industrial areas, and those types of activities that are more related to the field activities. And then when we go to the work position, we have, for example, some like a little bit bigger participation of women in some specific positions like sustainability board or HR board, but not in others like administrative board or supervision or forest service providers or forest workers. So we see those differences as well in the work positions. And then when we ask about the actions that the companies and the organizations were taking towards promote diversity and inclusion, we found that only the ones that are circled here are related somehow to are related to gender topics, like female leadership, female empowerment, that we've seen that 47% of the organizations were taking those actions, and LGBT plus community and trust communities. Of course, other companies were taking actions towards other types of themes and issues regarding D&Y. Also regarding to the barriers and now some inhibiting factors that could promote the gender equity, we found that, of course, Cecile mentioned that, the male dominance in the area. And then we heard that 73% believe that the main barrier is this. And then followed by, for example, shortage of qualified professionals to work in the area, as well as lack of sensitivity regarding to motherhood or breastfeeding and other topics. And then when we ask about the main opportunities and per se the motivating factors to promote gender equity, we've heard that almost 70% believes that the opportunities relate to gender equity practices in the recruitment and the selection process, and then followed by training of female teams to work in the field, as we saw that the proportion of men and women for field positions weren't so equal. And then leaders with a stance focused on promoting diversity and inclusion, as well as raising awareness of managers and many other topics that we can see here. So there are plenty of opportunities for us to achieve the gender equity. And then some best practices that the companies and the organizations shared with us are mainly focused on remuneration policies, performance, evaluation, and promotion with equity, with almost 53%, followed by announcement of job vacancies, declaring no discrimination of gender, and then training activities related to the SDGs, to the WEPs, women empowerment principles, collaboration with actions of Rede Mulher Florestal or us, Forest Women's Network, as well as other possibilities. So the main findings here is that, yes, there is a timid advance towards equity in the Brazilian forest-based sector. And as I explained before, it's an apparent increase of 6% of the female presence, comparing the two editions. Some areas have greater female presence, as well as in areas like nurseries, environment and quality areas, administrative, safety and health, occupational health, R&D, which is a pattern that we also observed on the previous edition. We believe that there is plenty of room to adhere to the SDGs and to the WEPs, considering that less than 50% of the organizations interviewed adhere to the SDGs. 95% of organizations reported that women and men received the same salary when they performed the same work. But in the survey, we found that the average salaries, there was a gap between them of almost 14% in favor of men. And the biggest variation was in the mid-management positions with a gap of almost 20%. Also, there is an increase from 46 to 89% comparing the two editions, the 2020 and the 2021 edition of the Outlook, in the number of organizations committed to issues related to D&Y. There's a slight increase from 67 to 86% in the number of organizations adopting either confidential and effective mechanisms to report and eliminate cases of sexual harassment and discrimination based on sex or in marital status, maternity, paternity, or sexual orientation. Only 18% of organizations reported to collect self-declaration data from their employees. So data regarding ethnic, racial, sexual orientation, and among other issues, and that's why we could not collect those data yet. And by looking those numbers, and as I mentioned before, there are plenty of others that will help us understand a little bit on the in the road that we are taking and the challenges and the opportunities. We think that the Outlook offers an invitation to reflect about the real opportunities of achieving a gender balance for sector in Brazil. So we would like to invite you to assess it with this QR code here, as well as, of course, give some important acknowledgements that made the Forest Gender Outlook happen. And the special thanks go to the Indústria Brasileira de Árvores, the Brazilian tree industry that helped with the financial resources and support, as well as helping to make us achieve their members and associates so that we could have enough information and data to do this study. We have to thank our supporting companies as well, Suzano, Arauco, and Ponce. And I would like also to thank all the voluntary people and that work with us in the councils, in the working groups, and of course our members. And we have 149 individual members. They're mainly placed in Brazil, but we do have some members around the world. We have also some companies and organization members related to all those types of industries. And we would like to thank to be here to present those data. And we are very happy to share that we think and we believe that there is a very fulfilling road for us to achieve and to understand that the gender balance forest sector will lead us to a much better, inclusive, and sustainable world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mariana, for your words. And I think data are always important because data can make us reflect on what is the status of several things happening in the world. And for diversity and inclusion, this is quite an important way to find opportunities of improvement in the area. Thank you, Mariana, so much. And now I would like to ask Natalia Granato, that I have introduced you before, to take the floor. Natalia, please.
Thank you very much. I'm gonna share my screen. Can you see my slides?
Yes.
Okay. So good afternoon, good evening, good morning to every one of you that choose our session to watch. I will try to respect the time so we can have time for questions and answers. So as Yvonne introduced myself, my name is Natalia Granato. I'm a forest engineer and I work at the Brazilian tree industry, the national association that represents a planted forest-based industry in Brazil. And I also work as vice president of the Forest Women's Network, the one who Mariana just introduced a minute ago. So this is what I'm gonna present to you. I'm gonna give you a brief information about what is IBA. And I'm gonna give you a broader overview. Of course, the gender agenda is the core of our work on diversity and inclusion, but I'm gonna give you a broad information of what we are doing at IBA. So how we started working with this agenda, what is the mandate that we have to work on this, some facts and figures, the capacity building that we are providing at IBA with a very interesting initiative that share value among within our chain of custody, some challenges and opportunities, and also some ways forward. So only the mouse is working. Just a little bit of information regarding IBA, the Brazilian tree industry. We are today about 45 companies associated at IBA, and as national association, we also are partners of state associations in Brazil, the 9 states where we have more planted forests in Brazil, so 9 states. And we represent companies that produce pulp, paper, panels, flooring, charcoal, and biomass for many, many products. So a little bit of our area. So we have, with all that 45 and many other companies in Brazil, we have 9.55 million hectares of plantations, so forests for commercial purposes. And we also have extra 6 million hectares of for conservation purposes. And from all of our forests, we have almost 7 million hectares that are certified by international recognized certification schemes like IFSA and PFC. And in last year, we've got 30,000 hectares under restoration programs. So this is a little bit about our forest industry in Brazil. let's get started about how we started working on diversity and inclusion at IBA and our sector. So in 2019, we welcomed Forest Women's Network at the IBA's office. And you can see in the first photo in the slide, some of our colleagues from Forest Women's Network. And as Mariana mentioned, we have supported data collection among our member companies. So Forest Women's Network could analyze and compile all the information that they published in the first panorama. And then in 2020, the Rede Mulher Florestal, or Forest Women's Network, launched the first panorama with unprecedented information on gender. And then we became a member of this organization, which we are very proud of to be part of. And then last year, we provided financial support to produce the second panorama that Mariana mentioned. And the topic of diversity and inclusion became a priority topic for IBA within the social pillar of the sustainability. Internally at IBA, we adopted a policy on diversity and inclusion recruitment process. So I don't know if you know, but Brazil is a Black country, and we have very few Black people working in our companies. And I was glad to recruit a Black girl for my team. And then we started including the diversity and inclusion as something that we put into practice at IBA. And with my representation, we've got representation at the vice presidents of the Forest Women's Network. And we started improving the data collection on diversity and inclusion at IBA itself, not only supporting the Forest Women's Network. So this is a brief of how was our start working on diversity and inclusion. So from that on, last year, our board of directors, so our CEOs of our member companies, created the steering committee on SESG at IBA. And this steering committee defined as the topic of diversity and inclusion was prioritized. This steering committee defined the mandate of our work on this agenda, which encompasses three paths. The first one is to measure the diversity and the initiatives that our sector has. The second one is to put efforts in capacity building in the value chain, not only in our companies. And third one is to define sectorial commitments on diversity and inclusion. So we are all working on these three areas. And just to give you some facts and figures regarding the diversity in Brazil as nation and also in our sector. So starting from the orange number, Brazil has 52% of women in the population, but as Mariana showed before, in the panorama of Forest Women's Network, we found out that only 19% of our workforce is composed by women. So there is a big gap between our society and the forest-based companies in Brazil, not only plantations, but also native management companies. And as I told you before, 56% of our people in Brazil is Black, and there is a lack of Black people, especially in the middle and in the top of the hierarchy in the companies. And there are other kinds of groups that are underrepresented in the company. So the LGBT, in Brazil, it's estimated that we have 10% of this group. We have about 6.7 disabled people in Brazil. And we have a specific legislation that says that company needs to have from 2 to 5% of the workforce with disabled people, depending on how is the size of your company. So how many people do you have in the company? And we have only 1% of indigenous people in Brazil, unfortunately, because you know, as many countries that were colonized by Europeans, these people disappeared. So not disappear, you know what I mean. Some other facts and figures, and this one is specifically in our companies. So we've made a survey that was focused on 2 areas: diversity in our member companies. This data is not published yet, but the second topic that we investigated was the initiative that companies already put into practice at the companies. And you can see in these 2 graphs that the internal diversity and inclusion initiatives at the company. So we have affinity groups, an area or a department dedicated to diversity, internal and external events, and many other initiatives. You can see that there is a lot of companies doing this kind of initiatives, and also external initiatives that the companies are doing. So participating of these NGOs like Forest Women's Network, which is the first bar above in the right-hand graph. So 45% of these companies that participated of this survey are somehow engaged with this fora, and the UN Women and many other initiatives. So the companies are starting to get involved in these initiatives, internally and externally, in different ways. And what we, IBA, as a national association, are doing. We started a training program at IBA, so we are focusing on capacity building to share value within our value chain. So our member companies decided to have these monthly events focused on specific areas with 2 hours of duration. We always have a CEO making the opening speech of the encounter, so they can show that there is a high level engagement. It's not only the technicals that participate of this initiative. We always invite specialists from other organizations to speak about different topics for us, and we bring 2 companies to showcase their experience in the companies. There is one part of this event which is open for everyone in the value chain, and the cases from the companies are closed only to the companies, so they can feel more comfortable to share the challenges and everything. And the teams that we are working right now is like planning diversity and inclusion, the unconscious bias, which is very important topic to work in this agenda, gender, ethnics and race, disabled person, LGBT, etc. And what is the target audience of this capacity building initiative? As I told you, it's for the value chain. So we are looking, we want to achieve companies, research institutes, NGO, certification schemes, all kinds of partners that we have. We invite them and they can participate of this capacity building initiative. So this is a very brief slide that show how a little bit of the result of this initiative. So we have had 3 encounters this year, 3 events, and we've got in one of these events almost 300 people participating in this event. So we are very happy with the people that we are achieving, but there is a point to be that deserve attention from us. As I told you, we have around 20% of women in the sector, but the audience of our training is mostly women. So we still need to get more men involved and engaged in this agenda. So, and I'm very happy that here in the audience we have a lot of men. So thank you. And we, as you can see, we have had companies associated at IBA, non-associated companies, and other organizations different than companies. So we are very happy with the result of this initiative. This is my second last slide, so I'm going to finish. Some challenges and opportunities in this agenda. I think there is a different level of engagement between companies, because there are large companies, small companies with different resources. And of course, depending on the area and the hierarchy within the company, there is always this different level of engagement. In Brazil, there is also the geographical heterogeneity of diversity. Some states like Bahia has 70% of Black people, and in the south of Brazil, we have perhaps 20%. So we have to have in mind that this diversity will also happen in national level. There is also a very big challenge, which is lack of trained workforce in general, because in Brazil, the forest sector is growing very fast and we are lacking trained workforce. And there is a bigger lack of diverse workforce. So it's a double lack of trained workforce in these two kind of characteristics. And as I told you, men are yet not very well engaged with this agenda. It seems like they feel they will lose opportunities for women. And we have to show that it's not about it. It's about including in everything, not only one group of the society. There is a huge space for education and capacity building. It's our duty as civil society, as people, as company, whatever, to share value among the society and the value chain. And this is a long-term journey. There is a need of evolve the culture aspects, relying on everyone, not only HR department at the companies, to say the minimum. And for IBA, what is the ways forward we have? So we will conclude this training along the 2021, this capacity building initiative I mentioned. We will keep collecting data on diversity and inclusion in the next couple of years. And 1 year we will be prepared to share this data, even if the numbers are not good, we have to admit that. And we need to promote a deeper discussion among the companies so we can define the commitments on diversity and inclusion. That was the third mandate we received from the ESG steering committee. That's what I would like to share with you. Sorry that I passed a little bit of the time, but I hope that it was useful for you, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Natalia, for these very, very interesting words around IBA and IBA's work and commitment with diversity and inclusion. Now, I would like to introduce you Barbara Oller from International Forest Students Association, that is going to talk us about the perspectives on gender and gender disaggregated data in forest education and training. Barbara is the head of Gender Subcommission at the International Forest Students Association. She just graduated with a master's degree in forest sciences with a thesis on gender-specific barriers in forestry, and she is about to start her PhD at the University of Natural Resources and Life Sciences in Vienna. Working for the Austrian Research Center for Forests, she organized the International Conference Forests in Women's Hands 2021 and co-coordinated a mentoring program addressed to women in forest. Barbara, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for this introduction. I will take a moment to share my screen. Do you still see the PowerPoint interface, or do you see the full screen presentation?
Full screen, thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. Good afternoon, good morning to wherever you are. I'm Barbara Oellerer. I'm very happy to be here representing the International Forestry Students Association, IFSA. We're very pleased to be part of this event, as for us as a students organization, it is very important to better understand and get further information on gender and gender equality in forestry, because then we can advocate for inclusive education in the forestry platforms that we're in, and we can provide capacity building opportunities to our members addressing inclusive forest education and training. In my presentation, I'll talk a bit about the perspectives on gender and gender disaggregated data in forest education and training from our standpoint. A quick overview of what I'll be talking about. I want to introduce the International Forestry Students Association. Then I want to address 4 main questions. That is, why is gender disaggregated data important for forest education and training? Why can gender disaggregated data only be the first of many steps? Then what gender disaggregated data we have in IFSA and what we know about gender in forest education and training. Then I want to make a little teaser of an open letter on gender and forest education that we plan to publish as IFSA, and then conclusions and outlook. First, the International Forestry Students Association. We're the largest international network for students of forestry and related fields. The organization was established in 1990, but student symposiums have been organized since 1973. Our vision is a world that appreciates forests, and what we want to do is to enrich our members' education through events, networking, and intercultural exchange. We're a non-political, non-profit, and non-religious organization, and we're run by students. A little bit about the structure. We have 51 officials. Those are position holders. And then there are local committees, meaning local chapters at universities in the different countries. This is important for later on when I'll show some data that we have. So keep that in mind. The importance of gender disaggregated data for forest education and training. While we should never just measure gender equality in mere numbers and in counting heads, if we cannot find certain data, it is because the topic has not been given enough importance. So we've seen data before that was already very detailed, but very often it just happens that maybe you find gender disaggregated data on a country level or a sector level, and there is not much more detail that we have. So if there is insufficient gender disaggregated data in forestry and also forest education, that means that gender equality in forestry is not yet seen as a top priority. And with all of this, we should keep our goal in mind, and that is not to just stop at the gender disaggregated data and stop at the numbers, but to look at the people behind what those numbers mean and signify. Gender disaggregated data is therefore the first of many steps. Let's assume a scenario that the data shows an underrepresentation of certain genders in the forestry sector compared to the share of that gender in the population at large. I found an overview of the forest sector workforce in the UNECE region from 2020, and that says that the data on gender in the forest sector are not comprehensive, making it difficult to draw conclusions on general trends. Overall, it can be concluded that women are underrepresented in the forest sector workforce. So that as an example. But then what does that mean? We have an underrepresentation, but we should not stop there, but ask the questions that we get from the numbers that we have. For example, what are the reasons for this underrepresentation? Then is the underrepresentation in certain sectors bigger than in others? Is it bigger in certain positions than in others, for example, senior, junior? How does this imbalance affect the people in the forestry sector, and how does this imbalance affect the people in society at large? And based on this, we as a student organization, from our point of view, the policy recommendations that we have are to increase the efforts in collecting gender disaggregated data and to fund further research, also with different research designs, again, to address the people behind the numbers. I would also like to emphasize that it would be important to address specifically gender in forest education, because seeing the imbalance in the forestry sector, it would be worth it to look into gender in forest education and training. Those who are currently in education are the next ones to enter the sector. And if you start there and set measures there, you can use the leverage you get from that to further gender equality in the forestry sector. Now, I am currently not aware of any gender disaggregated data regarding people in forest education and training outside of the level of maybe individual universities or maybe a country level. If you are aware of any such efforts, let me know. I'd be very interested to know. But what I can do is that I show to you the data that we have in IFSA. This is not something that we've always been doing. We started this process roughly 3 years ago. Nothing was done before that. And there are, of course, certain limits in what data and the extent of data that we can collect and manage as a student organization, but it is something that we would like to extend in the future. So what we have is IFSA officials. Those are the position holders, as I mentioned before, data on their gender of the last 3 years. And then we're in the middle of efforts to collect data about the gender, among other information of our members. Regarding IFSA officials, these are the last 3 years. Something that is very striking is that we have an overrepresentation of the female gender compared to the representation, the general representation in the forestry sector and probably also forest education. I can only assume that this is because often we tend to find non-males predominantly in the spheres of policy, of networking, of communication, and so on. And the people interested in those processes will find themselves in an organization like IFSA. These are my assumptions, not based on any research. Then regarding the IFSA members, we are in the process of collecting data, but I was allowed to show you the status of what we currently have. 37 of 133 local committees have filled the questionnaire, and this data that I'm showing you here is based on over 3,500 individuals. You can see it split among the individual regions, and this is the general overview, and again, similar with what I've already mentioned when talking about officials. We have slightly more female members than male members, and many, many more than other non-binary and people who did not indicate their gender. Then I also, in addition to showing you these numbers, I want to share with you what we know in IFSA about gender in forest education and training. What we know is mainly based on workshops that we did, and please keep in mind that we didn't do them from a research perspective, but just from what we do as an organization. We just organize events for our members, capacity building events to talk about certain topics and to further our forest education in that way. 2 online workshops were held about, on the topic of gender that I want to talk to you about, one in March 2021 and one in April 2021. The second one took place after the Forest in Women's Hands conference, where we also were one of the organizing partners. One thing that we can say after these workshops is that gender affects our forest education. I tried to compile in what ways, and one of the themes is a lack of female role models at university. Students said, we don't see ourselves represented, or I've never seen any female professor, not just in my classes, but in my whole country during my studies. Then the structures in forest education and training. It affects education. You're not allowed to do certain stuff, for example, measurements, if you're not considered as male. Then gender bias and stereotypes. There is a general gender bias that affects how we see other people. A lack of education on gender bias in forestry. Not enough education on gender equality and gender bias in university or in schools. And forest education needs to improve by fixing the curriculum. Then the male-dominated forestry sector, as we've also already heard before. Students said the forestry sector is very male normative, and people of all genders are expected to conform to those norms and be more masculine in a certain way. And then men are the safe choice and are chosen first for the job or a task. And lastly, unequal payment. Then in a second workshop with 22 participants, we asked them, has your gender affected your forest education? And some of the people who answered with yes were people who said in a positive way because they're male and that's just the standard or the norm for the sector. But the majority were people who had who reported about a negative influence on their forest education. And honestly, in my opinion, 36% of the people indicating that gender has affected your forest education is way too much. Then another question we asked during this workshop was what they thought the gender-specific barriers in forest education were, and I would like to share some of those with you. Research is considered to be for women and forest management more for men. Women have almost no opportunities in the forest sector who owns the forest, who takes decisions, all this is determined by men. Harassment and misogyny. It's not just the male professors who prefer male students for fieldwork, but also the female professors. Gender imbalance in the leading and decision-making positions of companies. When you are in the field, most of the workers are men. There are few female engineers, so it is difficult for them to take orders seriously. Then another question we asked was whether they had talked about gender with their fellow students before. And a very large group said yes about this. And I mean, there were also some who were not sure or who did not, because we collected notes during those breakout groups, who did not really address the question in a clear yes or no way. But regarding peer-to-peer exchange, this is something that we as IFSA can foster and offer a space for exchange. We can organize events, capacity building opportunities, trainings in this field. And this then ties back into our mission of improving our members' forest education. Then an effort that I would like to share with you that we've been doing within the gender subcommission in IFSA is an open letter on gender and forest education, where we want to advocate for gender equality in forest education and a gender-aware learning environment. Some of the things we ask for is better education on gender bias, gender-aware language in teaching, also training for lecturers, professors at university, and much, much more. We will we're planning to publish this letter in May or June 2022. It will be sent to forestry universities and departments and policymakers. It will be published as text and video. And if you want to be updated on when it gets published, you can send us a quick email at gender@ifsa.net. You can take a picture of this if you want, or later write it in the chat. I'm happy to share this email address. My conclusions, or our conclusions of this presentation and a little outlook. There is currently this lack of comprehensive gender disaggregated data in forestry and also forest education and training. The data availability reflects the perceived importance of a topic. Therefore, we need to increase our efforts in collecting gender disaggregated data, but we should not stop there, but combine these efforts with research to understand the gendered structures, to look at the people behind the numbers. And we also want to emphasize that research on gender in forest education and training would be very important. Then these are the references I used for this presentation, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Barbara. And this is so interesting because if anything starts at this level of education, it means that something is going to develop and something is going to improve. So I think your conclusions are not that successful result, but I think this is so important because, like you said, data are the basis for an improvement. So thank you so much, Barbara. And I would like now to invite Natalia to moderate this session of questions and answers coming from the audience. Thank you, and thank you, Natalia.
Thank you, Yvonne, and thank you, Barbara. It was very nice to see some of your survey results, very interesting. And we see that regardless the country and the culture, the problem with gender is the same. So there is a structural problem on that. So we have to work on this. So I'd like to ask if someone from the audience will, oh, we have 2 hands. I'm not gonna do ladies first because we have to, you know, please use the microphone and yes, please.
My name is Thomas. I work for the European Forest Institute. I'm based in Malaysia. I have a comment and a question. I think the problem with gender disaggregated data is that forestry and agriculture are usually lumped together. Yeah. So when we look for, maybe I pick this up. Yeah. When we look for gender disaggregated data, at least at a national level, the major problem that we encounter is that forestry and agriculture are lumped together. So it is very difficult to extrapolate from this data, you know, related to forestry. Mm. And there is actually a lot of gender disaggregated data, at least in Asia. But because of this problem, you don't know how it affects the forestry sector, because agriculture and forestry are quite different. I think Vietnam is a very interesting country. They have a lot of gender disaggregated data in the forest sector. And one way to look at such data is to go for the labor force surveys. Mm-hmm. And usually it's the Ministry of Labor that publishes these surveys, and there you can find gender disaggregated data. But again, the problem is that agriculture and forestry are lumped together, so it becomes complicated. And these surveys are also not done on a regular basis. So, you know, some of the data you find is a bit old. But I would say Vietnam is definitely a country to look at for this type of data. Then I have a question for Mariana. So I found it interesting to learn about the gender outlook for Brazil and the study. But from my experience, I mean, the companies we are talking about here, they're all very large companies. I mean, this may not be exactly the case for, I mean, may not be the case for Brazil, because Brazil is dominated by larger companies in the forest sector. But if I look at Africa, or if I look at Asia, you have a lot of micro and small enterprises. Many of them are informal. And I think it's important that when we produce any type of gender outlook study, we also need to look at the smaller players, because they are the ones that create livelihood opportunities, create employment opportunities, employ many women in rural areas. So I think we need to consider them as well, and not just look at the larger enterprises. But then I mean, I know this is difficult, and often, you know, it's difficult to have a survey that also includes the MSMEs, but I think it's important to also include them in all of these recommendations. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mariana, please.
Thank you very much, Thomas, for your comments, and happy to hear that inputs from you. Yes, I and we believe the same. We have to reach the smaller organizations. The second edition was a huge increase of reaching other companies, because the first one was, we could only achieve the forest plantations in Brazil. The first one was totally, the first outlook was totally developed with volunteer work from us, from Forest Women's Network. The second one, we had a huge help from Brazilian tree industry and the other ones that I mentioned as well, so that we could approach many other companies and more companies and organizations like associations, and as well as other initiatives that were included related to the native forest. But we know that there is a huge space for us to finding that there are many more, probably, and from what we know from other types of assessments, that we will find way more women on the forest the small forest initiatives, mainly in the Amazon forest, working with non-wood products and with other types of products that are related to the sustainably managed forest. So thank you for that. That's something that is definitely our goal and our aim to do. Sometimes it's not so easy to reach all of them. You may imagine the size of Brazil and the Brazilian companies and organizations that are here. But on the second edition, we were able to approach almost 60% of the forest area in Brazil. So it's representative. Thank you for that.
And if I can complement, as I told you in my slides, this is a journey, a long journey. So we started, and year after year, we hope to improve the data collection and everything. So now I'd like to invite a girl from the audience to make her a question.
Thank you everyone for the very interesting presentation. I think my question would go directly to Eva. You mentioned about the certification, and I think you also showed that there are quite some amount of the certified forest area under the company that Eva has some study. Are there any evidence that show that the certification also support the gender equality in the company, and also in particular for the working condition of the women, which is actually quite an important issue where we know already that there are some kind of gap in the working condition between men and women. And the second question is that could you also access the information whether the women understand or they have some awareness for their right at work, at least in this company?
Thank you for your question. I think that Mariana perhaps can also help me with this question. The Forest Women's Network Outlook also have information on the relation between certification and gender equity in the sector. And we know that the new standard of forests of FSC, at least, will consider indicators regarding gender. So it's going to be something required for the certification. So I would really confirm that, yes, I think as certification has helped many other aspects in social and environmental areas, now it's gonna also help improving this aspect, so gender. And we already know that FSC will have indicators on gender. I guess that PFC shall work on the same way. So I'm not aware if their standard will include this in a short term, but of course, I think they have been looking to that. And perhaps Mariana can complement if she wants, but there is this information on certification in the Forest Women's Network. And I don't know if I remember exactly the second question, sorry. But we've seen some empowering of women in the workforce in our companies. I think that in the last 2, 3, 4 years, the companies, the leaders, the CEOs, and especially the workforce are getting empowered themselves, and they are being listened, at least. And it's something that is happening in the companies bottom up and top down. So I think when we have only from one direction, no matter it's top down or bottom up, it's harder. And I think that both directions are happening. You know, the workforce is working on that, and the companies are asking for support from consultancies to start building a culture of diversity and inclusion. And we have seen some changes happening already. So, but again, as I told you, this is a journey, long journey. We have this embellished scenario because we are like this for 2000 years. So it's gonna take some time to change that. But I do see that some transformation are happening. Mariana, feel free to complement if you want.
Thank you, Natalia. I'm just going to add that on the Forest Gender Outlook from Forest Women's Network, there are plenty of data regarding to the FSC new indicators. For example, the information about systems that promote equity, gender equity, and that evitates discrimination. We found 48% of the organizations mentioned yes. For example, opportunities open to men and women regarding to the FSC IGI 2222 regarding to the existence of the opportunities. So 86% of the organizations said that yes, they have. Regarding to the same salary between women and men, almost 95% said that yes, there is equality of pay for gender, and all of the IGIs, the indicators, were referred and were asked on the Outlook. So I'm sorry, we don't have much time to cover that now, but I invite you all to find the data there on the Outlook, and I'm going to put the link to access it on the chat, on this chat.
Natalia?
Yes,
one question here.
Please come to the microphone.
We have 3 minutes left.
Yes, we have only 2 minutes. Please go very direct to
Very
your
short direct
yeah.
intervention. I'm coming from FSC, and Yvonne knows his work as well, and Natalie later. One of the criteria indicators also says to 2.2 that paternity leave has to be granted, which I think is a good step to show that it's not only about promoting women, but going for gender mainstreaming. The other thing is FSC is right now working on refining of the wording, which can have an influence on national standards, but in the positive sense, I think more clear, more easy, and more implementable. And we are going to report better on segregated data. So this is, we are talking here about Brazil, but this is for certificates from 80 countries in the world, where FSC sooner or later can enable people to find gender data. Not complete, not perfect, but much better than now. And contact me if you want to know more later on.
Thank you very much. Can you say your name? No. Marion. Okay, thank you, Marion. Yeah. And now you, please.
Mine will be very quick. My name is Daud Kachamba. I work for the African Forest Forum. My question goes to Barbara. I was so happy to see that students are doing very well now. They are doing research on gender issues. That's really encouraging. But I just wanted to find out from you on the proportion of African students in the IFSA organization, because I noted that the study didn't capture, the results didn't capture data from Southern Africa. So it's just, I just wanted to know the proportion of African students in the organization. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for this question. I'll try to be super fast in answering it, seeing as we're running out of time. Regarding Southern Africa, the LCs, the local committees, have yet to fill the survey that the membership department is currently working on. So as of now, unfortunately, we haven't received the answers from there yet, but of course that will be included. Regarding Northern Africa, it's 52% to 48% females to males. Yeah, again, this is just a process that has started very recently. We're at 37 of 133 local committees, and seeing as all of this is volunteer-based, sometimes there are limits in how fast we can obtain the data and getting back the data that we need for this. But happy to hear that you're interested in learning more.
Thank you, Barbara. I think we have one more question. Please be very quickly.
Quick. Hello, my name is Deepawali. I'm working for Ministry of Forest and Environment Nepal, and I also represent Female Foresters Network Nepal. We have been working on integrating gender in forestry sector in our country through Female Foresters Network. Then my question is that the challenges all over this is like how much priority we are giving to integrate the gender in forestry sector. And while talking about equality in the forestry sector, our experience is like that, despite of having a gender inclusive structural arrangement, the essential factor which arises from the informal rules has been a big challenge in our country. I mean to say that despite of having a gender inclusive structural arrangement, the essential factor arising from informal rules has been a challenge. Has been a big challenge. So what is your experience on it? Does this gender forestry outlook also include this essential factor, either as a barrier or as an opportunity? So I would like to request you to share your experiences on how women agency has been addressed in these types of forestry outlooks document. Thank you.
For who would be the question?
Anyone, please.
Barbara, Mariana, I think it's more related to data collection, perhaps.
I couldn't understand the question. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think the question is not clear for everyone. Can you try again? A very direct question, and
because
please
I
slowly,
I speak too fast, so it has been a challenge. I mean to ask that while talking about women leadership or while talking about gender equality in forestry sector, despite of having all those structural arrangement, I mean to say that gender sensitive policy, gender sensitive institution, gender sensitive system, despite of having all these factors, the essential factors, the women agency has been a big challenges, which is more directed to from the informal rules we have. That is, informal rules means our culture, our norms, our values. So does these things has also been incorporated in this report, because it has been a big challenges for us. Yeah. So I would like to highlight on those things that your I found it more interesting that does gender forest outlook also incorporated these factors or not? Mm-hmm. So my question is that.
Okay. I think it's clear now. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you very much for repeating it. Yes, there is a lot of other things besides the structure and the opportunities that are related to the bias that we live in. Unfortunately, we live in masculine societies and sexist societies. So there are a lot of unconscious bias that are raised in us women as well as in all men and everybody, so that we think that women can do that but cannot do that. Women are supposed to be working with those issues and not with those. And this is something we have to change from the very beginning. Like it's super hard to do that. It's not something that the companies will do by themselves. It's something that the whole society has to look at and perceive that there is a huge responsibility, for example, for us parents, mothers and fathers to raise kids that perceive gender differences as just differences, you know, and not like how can I say that, things that are going to happen just because you are either man or woman or whatever other gender you are going to become, you know. So this is something that we have to admit, that it's unfortunately not only on the companies and the organizations' hands, but in everybody's hands.
Thanks, Mariana, and thanks everyone. We will need to finish the session. Thank you very much for those of you who are online, for those of you who are here. And it was great to see you all and have this discussion. See you soon. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.